What's up, guys? Welcome to my channel. My name is Laurier, and if you're wondering why I'm dressed up like a bootleg Steve Jobs, it's because I just had an interview like an hour ago. It's for an internship that'll mean a lot to me, so wish me luck, guys. In this video, we're going to be talking about Mr. Henry VIII yet again, and this video is going to be part 5 in a mini series that I've been working on. And if you haven't checked out parts 1 through 4, please feel free to check them out. I'll include the links in the description below and also in this video. And of course, if you like the channel, go ahead and subscribe and click that notification bell. Going forward, I want to just include a little disclaimer at the beginning of all of my videos here on out, because I don't want to give you guys the wrong impression as if I'm this like crazy history expert. So here's my little disclaimer. I am not a history expert. I am just a student of history and a lover of history. So I'm not the end all be all to all things history. So please feel free to check me in the comments if I say anything inaccurate or just dated. With that being said, you don't have to be a jerk about it. You could be nice. Let's be cordial here. In all seriousness, I do love learning from other people. So definitely please feel free to drop something in the comments about that. All right, so let's go ahead and pick back up where we left off in part 4. So Anne and Henry, they meet sometime around 1525. And at this point, Henry's falling in love with Anne. Come on, Reggie, don't start snoring. I got my beagle sitting here, so if you hear a dog snoring in the background, I apologize. That's just who he is. He likes to snore. What can I say? Henry meets a young courtier named Anne, and she is fresh off the boat from France. She's from England, but she was serving Henry's younger sister Mary in France when she was married to then King of France. He falls in love with Anne. Over the years, he spends time getting to know her, and he has a lot of side pieces, as we've discussed previously throughout the years, but Anne doesn't want to be a side piece. It's all or nothing with Anne, so he would have to marry her, and therefore Anne would have to become the Queen of England. But Catherine's in the way, and Henry wants to get rid of Catherine because she can't give him the son, the heir that he desperately desires. This man was thirsty for a son. Over the course of 7 years, Henry and Anne are fighting to get an annulment. Henry wants to get an annulment from his current wife, Catherine, but the Pope is not granting this annulment, and Henry fights for 7 years to leave his current wife, Catherine. So this little back and forth that Henry had with the Pope and having his advisors trying to get this annulment was referred to as the Great Matter. This is what Anne and Henry called it, their Great Matter. Now, while all of this is going on, the Reformation is taking place in parts throughout Europe. It's making its way to England, but it isn't in full force just yet. Now, I'm not going to go and provide full detail about the Reformation. This isn't a video on the Reformation, although I would like to make a video on the Reformation eventually. I am going to provide a little bit of context on what the Reformation was. It is very relevant to Henry's life and what happens here on out. So the Reformation was a religious movement that started in Germany that would completely change Catholicism and the papacy. And many historians have dated the beginning of the Reformation around 1517 when Martin Luther penned his 95 Thesis on the door of the Church of Wittenberg. See, the Catholic Church was really powerful during this time. It's not like it is today. Like today, we can't fathom a society, at least in the US and other places, where there's no separation of church and state. But during Henry's time, the church was everything. The Pope was a very powerful figure. The Pope had access to a military. He had political sway. The papacy was very wealthy. So they were a force to be reckoned with. So much so that even monarchs weren't excluded from their wrath and their authority. And not only that, the Catholic Church really impacted everyday life for just regular people like you and I, not just monarchs. They impacted the way people thought, what they ate, how they had families. Really try to put yourself in this situation where the church is everything in these videos, because I think that it provides a different perspective about how things work. Because sometimes I'll think like, how could somebody like do something like that? How could somebody think something like that? Like, I would never do something like that. But you've got a lot of people who are, and this isn't to bash religion, but you've got a lot of people who are being swayed and controlled and manipulated by people who are in places of authority within the church. And that's pretty much been their lives for generations on. So different world we're dealing with here. So in these 95 Theses that Martin Luther created, essentially it was 95 arguments against the Catholic Church. So this was like some revolutionary stuff back then. Martin Luther doing this was a threat to his life. And I'm pretty sure that he knew it when he did this. I'm going to give you an example of one of the arguments that Martin Luther made on this thesis that he posted on the church door. Thesis 32 states, those who believe that they can be certain of their salvation because they have indulgence letters will be eternally damned together with their teachers. So you might be asking yourself, what the hell is an indulgence letter? Indulgence letters were granted to people who had sinned or committed some grievous act, and it was a way to forgive them after they did some penance or some holy work to rectify their wrongs. Very similar to like a confessional type of situation, but instead you literally have like a reference letter to God stating, I am good, I don't need to go to hell, I don't even need to go to purgatory, I can go straight up to heaven. I got my reference letter from the Pope himself. That's essentially what an indulgence letter was. Probably not the best definition, but that's the way I understand it. I don't think that indulgence letters are a thing today. I don't think that the Catholic Church does that. If I'm wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that they don't. So Martin Luther really hated this. He despised it, and he felt like a lot of the acts that the papacy were doing were unholy in themselves. So Martin's ideas about the corruption in the Catholic Church began to spread like wildfire throughout all of Europe, and eventually it started to make its way to England. Now, Henry at this time had no interest in the Reformation at all. In fact, he was a staunch supporter of the Pope. He loved him some Pope. Henry was actually so upset about Martin Luther's 95 Thesis that he responded he tried to respond like a gangster. Like, he was so upset about this. He's like, I'm defending my mans. I am defending the Pope at all costs. In 1521, he wrote, possibly with the direction of his advisor Thomas More, and published a book called Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, and that's supposed to be Latin for defense of the seven sacraments. Botched Latin, might I add. And this text was written pretty much as like a comeback. These are my bars against Martin Luther for what he's saying. The Pope really liked this, and in return for Henry's support, he gave him this ridiculous title called Defender of the Faith, and he wore this title like a badge of honor for some time. I just mentioned like a minute ago some guy named Thomas More. He actually plays an important role in Henry's life, so I'm going to briefly mention him as well. Thomas More was Henry's friend, and he was also his Lord High Chancellor from 1529 to 1532. Lord High Chancellor was Wolsey's job. Remember Wolsey? Yeah, he eventually inherited Wolsey's job, and I'm thinking like, man, oh hell no! Thomas More must have been like, nah, I really don't want this job. The last guy died. I mean, Wolsey did die on his own, you know, from illness or whatever, but Henry was going to kill Wolsey. He was going to execute him. So do you really want this job at this point? I wouldn't. But he becomes his High Lord Chancellor when Henry offers the job to him. Now, Thomas More, he wore many hats. He was a lawyer, a scholar, a humanist, a writer, philosopher, and he was a staunch supporter of the Catholic Church, like our dear Henry at this time. And so because of this, of course, Thomas More was extremely against the Reformation. And he tortured a lot of Protestants. He tortured a lot of them. For sure. Thomas was a supporter of Catherine, but he did support Henry's decision to leave Catherine to an extent. He was there with him every step of the way, but it wasn't until Henry decided to cross the Pope that he was like, no, sir, you go too far. Too far, sir. Too far. Now, I mentioned in part 4 that the Pope sent a representative to preside over a trial with Wolsey to decide whether or not Catherine and Henry's marriage was legit. This trial took place on May 31st, 1529. And during that trial, Catherine was present. And this woman actually bent on her knees in front of her man, Henry, and pleaded with him. And this was one of the most emotional, impactful speeches, so much so that it impacted the people then, and her words still today have just as much impact and emotion as they did then. Here's this queen who comes from a royal background, a very prestigious background. Her parents are those assholes who eventually go to the Americas and enslave people. But anyway, I digress. They're explorers. But yeah, this great queen who's bowing down on her knees in front of the public, in front of her subjects, pleading with her husband to not leave her. It's crazy. And I'm pretty sure that Catherine knew that This speech was her moment to shine. This speech was her moment to be as impactful as she could and to get as many people on her side as humanly possible. And of course, Henry was well aware of this. He didn't like it. It's said that several times during her speech, Henry tried to get her to come off her knees, like, come on, woman, get up. Catherine was like, no, I'm staying right down here. She refused. And then he finally gave up. Yeah, she had a lot of support, but it still, in the end, wasn't enough for Catherine. Now, part of Catherine's argument included an appeal she submitted to the Pope to instead have this case tried in Rome instead of in England. And in the end, the Pope approved her appeal. He also told Henry, no, Henry, no. Until that time, until a decision is made in Rome, you may not marry anybody. You are married to Catherine, and that's that. But this trial would never, ever take place in Rome. So enters another player into Henry's life that tells Henry exactly what he wants to hear in order to leave Catherine for Anne. And his name is Thomas Cromwell. He was an old protege of Wolsey before his fall from grace, and somehow he was able to still rise in court and remain even after all the scandals surrounding Wolsey. He even got a place in Parliament and became the king's BFF, like another one of Henry's little advisors. In 1530, Henry appointed him to his Privy Council. Now, unlike More, Cromwell was a supporter of the Reformation. He wanted to find a way to spread it throughout England, and he knew that Henry's plight was the perfect scenario, and he could take advantage of it to get exactly what he wanted. More told Henry that the only way he would get that annulment was if he broke with Rome, made a separate church that would be called the Church of England, and then make himself the supreme head of church. Now, doing something like this was just unheard of. It was just radical. The church was like the ish. They were the end all be all, and they kind of provided a sense of checks and balance with monarchs. There was some type of authority over them. So this was just crazy talk. But you know what? Henry said, that'll do, pig. That'll do. Let's do this. Let's push the Pope to the side, and I am going to become not only the King of England, the king of the whole church. So in this situation, there's literally nobody to stand in Henry's way. No authority to check him. Nobody. You just got some crazy king running around doing whatever the heck he wants, which is a terrifying thought. I'm not going to sit here and say that I agree with the church having so much power and all the corruption that took place, but it is a scary thought for somebody like Henry to just had no type of authority over him in any sense of the word. So after several failed attempts to get the Pope to annul his marriage from Catherine, Henry finally said, screw this, let's go with your plan, Cromwell. I'm done with this. So he took Cromwell's advice, broke from Rome, and left Catherine and proceeded to marry Anne. So a year after Wolsey's death, Henry marries Anne in a secret ceremony. And it's thought that this was because she was pregnant at the time, and they started getting it on at this point because I guess Anne pretty much was like, the deal is sealed. This is gone. I'm becoming the queen. We can go ahead and have sex, whatever you want. So this secret ceremony takes place on November 14th, 1532. And then on January 25th, 1533, he marries her publicly. Now, I'd just like to note that Henry was married to Catherine for 24 years. And this marriage would prove to be the longest marriage that Henry had in his entire life over the course of his many marriages. And he just kicked this woman out of the castle like hot garbage. Like those 24 years meant nothing. Catherine lost her titles. Of course, she was no longer queen. In fact, Henry gave her a new title, which was the Dowager Princess of Wales. And this was kind of like an extra slap in the face to Catherine, because it signified that she was actually his late brother Arthur's legitimate wife, not his. Because remember, Henry's late brother, who passed away when he was really young, was Catherine's original husband. She was first married to him before Henry. And this title indicates that this is the widow of Arthur and that we were never wed, because annulment is more than divorce. Annulment is pretty much, this never happened. We were never married. It was never legitimate. Didn't take place. We're erasing history like that. So Catherine was forced out of the castle to live at the Moor Castle in 1531. And so this was even before he married Anne. He had already kicked his wife out of the castle publicly before he even married Anne.
Bye, Felicia.
Where she lived, she was allowed to have some visitors, but Henry controlled who she could see. And this unfortunately included her daughter, her one and only child, Mary, who, by the way, now that he was married to Anne and pushed Catherine to the side, Mary is no longer a princess. She's now illegitimate. She lost her title. So instead of being referred to as Princess Mary, she is now referred to as Lady Mary. And poor Mary isn't allowed to see her mother. She wasn't even allowed to write to her mother. Although mutual friends of Mary and Catherine would smuggle letters between them from time to time, but Mary and Catherine wouldn't go on to see each other up until the day Catherine died, which is just cruel. And there was also the issue of Henry trying to get Mary and Catherine to acknowledge Anne as the rightful queen and all of their children to come as the rightful heirs.
What?
He expected his ex-wife and his firstborn child to acknowledge their illegitimacy, and this other chick, this side chick, no offense Anne, I like Anne too, I like all the people, but I'm just getting into the mind of Mary and Catherine. But you expect us to praise this side piece that just took everything from us and acknowledge her? Okay, this man was off his rocker. So Henry separating himself from the Roman Catholic Church had quite a domino effect, and this made Henry the end-all be-all of all of England. No one, including the Pope, could stand in this man's way with anything he wanted. And this included the large amount of land in England and Wales that the church owned. This land that he inherited, that was initially owned by the Pope, was now his, and it made him an even more wealthy monarch, which I'm pretty sure Henry thought about this when he was executing his little plan with Cromwell. And then Henry goes on to enact a series of policies with the help of his buddy old pal Cromwell. He demanded that the clergy recognize him as the sole protector and supreme head of the church and clergy of England, and he also taxed the hell out of them. And then in March of 1532, Parliament passed a petition created by Cromwell, of course, called the Supplication Against the Ordinaries. What a name! Like, where did they get these names from? The Defender of the Faith, the Supplication of the This is why some people find history to be boring. I understand. I understand now. So this supplication against the ordinaries denounced the abuses of the clergy and their legal power. And right here is where Thomas More just has enough. So in response, More asked Henry to let him step down from his position as Lord Chancellor. And on May 16, 1532, Henry let him do just that. He resigned. But Henry's policies and changes don't stop there. They get even crazier. Another one was the Statute and Restraint of Appeals. And this meant that the English clergy could not appeal to Rome on issues concerning marriage and other matters. Now, this was enacted to ensure that going forward, no one, including the church, could interfere with any of Henry's decisions regarding marriage. It's like Henry intended to just keep collecting wives and divorcing wives. It's like he just had a premonition. He's like, I am going to continuously fail in my marriages. So Anne was in support of all this, and she was also a supporter of Cromwell at this time. And of course she was. I mean, if it wasn't for all this stuff happening, she wouldn't have become queen. Henry also threatened and demanded his subjects to accept his new wife and his annulment to Catherine. And if they didn't, it was treason, and you would be killed, pretty much. Everyone even had to take an oath acknowledging Anne as the rightful queen, as well as all of their future children as the rightful heirs. Yes, they had to take an oath, everyone. And if you didn't take the oath, you were put to death. Like that. And what do you know? Henry's good old buddy, old pal, Thomas More, he's like, no, I'm not taking that oath. I don't care. So on July 6, 1535, Henry beheads his friend, Thomas More, for refusing to take the oath. And what's crazy is that More was somebody that Henry loved and respected as a friend. Just wrap your head around that. This man was able to murder somebody he loved, somebody who was his friend, his confidant. At this point, this is the second advisor of Henry's that he's killed. I know he supposedly didn't kill Wolsey, but I'm just gonna put that tally mark there for Wolsey as well, because he would have been killed. Henry used the Reformation for his own wants and desires. He wasn't claiming it. He's like, that's not mine. I'm not claiming the Reformation. No reformists over here. No Protestants. He just used it for his own needs, and that was that. This caused a lot of issues and confusion, as you can imagine, in England, because religion again was a big deal. So I'm Catholic, I'm Protestant, that's wrong, that's not right. Oh, what a heretic, you're Protestant. Oh, what a heretic, you're a Catholic. This goes on and on and on and on and on for a long time. Henry also causes what's known as the dissolution of the monasteries. He likes to snort, and he's wide awake. He snores with his eyes just wide open, glaring at you like a snorting demon. So with the help of Cromwell and Parliament, Henry was able to shut down several religious houses throughout England and Wales. And this supposedly started with the intent to get rid of all the corruption in all of the churches throughout England, supposedly. Because some of these religious houses were insanely wealthy. I'm talking about cash money. But some of them also did charitable work. And a lot of the communities really depended on these churches, very similar to today. But Henry didn't care about this. In 1509, there were more than 850 religious houses throughout England and Wales. And by the time Henry gets done with what he had to do, 800 of them were dissolved, just gone. And this displaced over 10,000 monks, nuns, friars, and so forth. So as time goes on and Henry gets older, Henry starts to physically change into a lot of what you see in paintings of Henry today. He starts to gain a lot of weight. And this is for a multitude of reasons. It's not just one, Of course, he was overeating and overindulging, but there was a little bit more to it. Much of what was recorded in history claims that in Henry's youth he was very fit, very handsome, very active in sports, very talented. However, one fateful day in 1536, Henry was injured yet again, because we've talked about other injuries that have happened at this point, but yet again, he gets injured. What do you think he was doing when he got injured? He was lancing. This motion. He was lancing. God, I will never do that motion again. But yeah, he got injured in a jousting accident again in 1536. But this one would forever change his life. At 44 years old, Henry severely hurt his leg and his head during the event. And this happened while he was married to Anne, and she was pregnant at this time. It's said that when Henry fell during the jousting accident, the weight of his armor was crushing him, which I don't know if you've seen medieval, early modern armor, but it's very sturdy, very heavy. And then also the weight of the horse fell on top of his body as well. And the combination of these two forces was just brutal on Henry's body. Many historians believe that this accident marks the point that just completely changes Henry's temperament. And just to give you a really good idea of how severe this accident was, people wrote back then that it was so bad that they really didn't think that Henry would survive. It was a miracle he did. And then one other account noted that Henry was out cold for a few hours. So Henry had already suffered from a previous jousting injury in March of 1524, and the combined effects from both of these incidents caused Henry to suffer from a severe concussion. He also had ulcers on both of these legs from these accidents, and this particular accident caused one of them to burst. And this caused Henry to be in a constant state of infection for the rest of his life. As a result, Henry would go on to suffer just unimaginable pain for the rest of his life. And of course, this affects his temperament. There's also mention that due to the nature of his leg injuries, the ulcer was just an open wound that constantly leaked fluids. And it stunk. It was stinking. Henry goes on to marry just young woman after young woman at this point, and just imagine being a young, cute thing. You got your whole life ahead of you until you're forced to marry this man, and you're getting piped down by somebody with a leaky leg and a stinky leg. No, stop. So after this injury, Henry being in a lot of pain, he was immobile. I mean, he could move around, but for the most part, he was sitting a lot. And then he was also turning towards food. So over time, the combination of a lack of mobility and an abundance of food, rich, unhealthy food, might I add, because most people at court during this time, they did not eat healthy. They thought that peasant food was nasty and bad, and the peasants were actually eating the healthier foods like legumes and vegetables and stuff. So he's eating horrible foods and he's not moving, and over time his weight just gets out of control. Just to give you an idea, Henry's armor from 1512 had a waist measurement of 32 inches, but his final suit of armor in 1544 confirmed his waist size went up to 54 inches. He was also an extremely tall man. Henry's skeleton was discovered in 1813, confirming his height was 6 feet 2 inches, making him an estimated 400 pounds at the time of his death. I mentioned that during this jousting accident that Anne was pregnant. Unfortunately, 5 days after the incident, Anne would go on to have a miscarriage. And there's really no mystery as to why. I mean, this must have been a very stressful situation for Anne because her position as queen was a bit precarious at best to a lot of people. Even though people were swearing on the Bible, taking that bullshit oath, that didn't mean that they truly supported Anne and truly believed that she and her future children were legitimate. So Anne's future and her soon-to-be child depended on Henry and his well-being, and him of course being alive. If Henry died, there was a good chance that Anne could have been kicked off the throne, and I mean, not only that, she could have potentially had her life taken. The stress from that, I can imagine, is probably, and again, I wasn't there, I don't know, but I can imagine the stress of that could have caused any woman to have a miscarriage. That's a lot to deal with mentally. So that concludes part 5 of the Henry VIII mini-series. Well, at this point, it's not really a mini-series, it's just a series. Let's call it what it is. It's a series. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I love doing these videos, and thank you so much to the people who have subscribed, who have been watching my videos as they come out. I know it's not a lot of people, but even if it was just 5 people, it means so much to me that you come and actually enjoy these videos. If you like the videos, if you like my content, please subscribe, please like the video. Turn on that notification bell so you'll know when the next video comes out. I'm out of here.
Perfect.